When I was in the second grade, my second grade teacher said, if I don't go play with the little boys, I'm going to put a dress on you. When I was in the first grade, I got a spanking for something. They pulled me out in the hall. This is when you could give licks in school. I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was getting the spanking. The teacher called my parents that night. We had gone to this Mexican food restaurant. We were talking, and my parents said, "Is there something that you need to tell us?" I was like, "Oh, I got a spanking today." And they said, "Why?" And I was like, "I don't know. I honestly can't tell you why." So later we've had a meeting with the teacher, and she said that it was because I stole manila paper. And it blew my mind. I had no idea. I had no understanding of what that meant. We were doing construction paperwork that day, and I messed up. And on a piece of paper, I wadded it up and threw it on my desk. And I walked over and I got another piece of manila paper, and I started doing my project. Apparently, I was stealing the manila paper. It was so this began to develop this thing in me where I didn't want to be misunderstood, because the world didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to me then. I was always looking out the window. My imagination was in a bazillion different places. I was dancing all over the place. I was all this stuff. In second grade, like I said, my teacher said, if I don't go play with the little boys, I'm going to put a dress on you. Now, that experience confused me even more. Now, imagine that happening today. I would play with in recess. I would go and I would play with the black girls, and I would play with anyone that was running around on the merry-go-round. I was playing pretend. We played school. We played home. Anywhere that I could pretend or play an experience. That's where I was. The imagination was there. I had a lot of really good friends that were black girls, and I loved them very much. I was very fortunate to be raised in like kind of a um, mixed grade school all the way through high school. And then in fourth grade, I went to school, and I guess I'd gotten my brother's shirt and it was too long, and my shorts, I guess, were too short. And my fourth grade teacher pulled me out in the hall and asked me, and I loved this teacher. I had a lot of respect for this teacher. Pulled me out in the hall and asked me what was underneath the shirt that I was wearing. I was so confused, because you start thinking, like, what are they thinking? What are they interpreting? How are they interpreting what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to say? Because I don't know why I'm being like nothing. So I reflected back to first grade, and I was like, well, maybe she thinks I stole something. So like I was just like, nothing. I have nothing underneath this shirt. She apparently took that to mean that I thought I was wearing a dress. Everyone. I've never wanted to be a girl. I love women. I think women are awesome. I think they're fantastic. I think they should be running the world right now. I never wanted to be one. Now, I've played characters that were were feminine. I've played characters that were drag queens. I played Hedwig and the Angry Inch in San Francisco. Um, but I've never wanted to be a woman. But it didn't make sense to me. So that night, this is why it's so important. That night, I came home, and my dad, who is awesome, sat me down and had a heart to heart with me. And we would call that the sex talk. The bees, the birds and the bees. And he went through and navigated and talked to me and discussed with me. I had to fix my phone. What that is, and what and so and I listened, and I was like, Dad, I know all of this. He goes, you do? I knew the fundamental aspects of it. I understood it. And we talked, and I felt very safe. I felt very safe having that conversation with my dad. My dad was Christian. My mom is Christian. I come from a very loving household. My brother and I are as different as night and day. Raised in the same household. He's very, very different. And I love him and I respect him. But had I gone home and had that teacher called my parents and that home not been safe, had my dad not been the incredible human being that he is, had I been in a bad household where love wasn't living, or communication and the freedom for me, like I was an expressive kid, I was always expressive. Had I gone home and that information, and there's not a protected conversation between teacher and parents, like we lived in a pretty small, relatively, I mean, it was a big school, but most people knew my parents. I mean, it was small enough. Had there not been a safe place for me to be in that time, it would have been detrimental. And it would have been detrimental and perpetuated this. And I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand the world around me. Why all the adults were so concerned about this and that. Like I was just trying to live my life. Imagination. I was different, for sure. I loved reading books. I loved playing pretend. I would go home and I would play war with my, in the neighborhood. I'd play tag football. We'd invent these games with our neighborhood kids where we played cards. You know who you are if you're seeing this. My imagination was vivid and all over the place. I didn't understand what was so wrong with that. And luckily, I had a very loving family and a loving household that elevated that imagination, that supported that imagination. But had it not, and I'd gone home to something else, it would have perpetuated the shame. It would have perpetuated the self-loathing, that I'm wrong for having an imagination, for expressing myself, so it instilled in me this thing about being misunderstood. I wanted to be very clear. I didn't go in the rebellious place. I went into the good place, to be good, but not at the expense of compromising who I was, my authenticity. Shame perpetuates shame. And what we are experiencing is a lot of undealt with shame that's in our country as a collective, that began from not creating solutions for protecting our Indigenous brothers and sisters, for not apologizing effectively and getting rid of and educating the negative things, the bad things that have happened in our country, not ever addressing them. So when you don't address it, when you don't acknowledge it, it perpetuates. And it becomes, and you bury on top of it. You just bury one negative thing on that top of the other, negative on top of the other. And what happens is you don't have anything else but negative underneath it. And it becomes amplified. It becomes exposed. The green grass doesn't grow anymore. The fruits of love and connection and creativity become squashed because we have layers and layers and layers of collective shame. And if we don't have a safe place to acknowledge it. No matter what, it gets exposed. And there are a lot of people who still don't want to acknowledge it. A lot of people who still don't want to admit it. And until we do that, we just keep piling up the shame.